to another episode of the Steward Leadership Podcast, where we speak to steward leaders. These are people who see themselves as stewards of planet Earth and humanity and believe strongly that there is no compromise between purpose and profit. These people believe and choose to do well by doing good. Now, we talk to business leaders, we talk to societal leaders, we talk to people from academia, anybody who can shed light on how to do well by doing good, how to make success happen by addressing the very challenges that are threatening us today. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me Professor Stephen Cave from Cambridge University with us. He spoke at our Steward Leadership Summit yesterday here in Singapore, and I have the pleasure of welcoming him to the show. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you so much, Rajeev. Pleasure to be here.
Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and the work you're doing at Cambridge?
Yeah, so I'm a philosopher by training, but now I lead a very interdisciplinary, brand new institute at Cambridge called the Institute for Technology and Humanity. And we look in a very interdisciplinary way at the challenges of technological transformation. So both the opportunities, building tech for good, but also the many challenges. And so we think about the ethics and governance of technology.
Technology and humanity. Now, technology has always been a double-edged sword, isn't it? That it has created good things and it has also destroyed or done harm.
Yes, absolutely. Technology always creates new possibilities for good and ill. Yeah. We wouldn't have evolved as a species without fire. Think of the immense benefits, but also the immense potential to destroy that fire has.
Exactly. So, I want to dive into one particular paper that I read of yours, which I was fascinated by, in which you trace the history of intelligence. We'll come back to AI, artificial intelligence, in a bit, but just intelligence and how intelligence has been used for hundreds of years. You talked about the fact that intelligence has been used as a way to justify dominance. One kind of people dominating over other kind of people. Tell us a little bit about what that research was all about.
Well, when everyone started talking about AI again, I mean, as you know, it has hype waves and then so-called winters. But when everyone started talking about AI the last 10 or 15 years, I was curious to understand a bit more about what this word intelligence is doing. And it turns out that when the term artificial intelligence was coined by John McCarthy around 1955, the idea of intelligence had a very prominent role in American culture. It was coined in America, of course. But it actually was quite a new term then. It's a term we're so familiar with and has become so important to our culture, I mean, particularly in the US and the UK, but the rest of the West and the rest of the world too. So I looked into this history to try to understand what this term was doing. And it turns out that the term intelligence really rose to prominence only in the 20th century. So it existed before then as a word. It was as often used to mean like military intelligence, as in, what spies gather, as it was to describe a kind of human faculty. And if you look at the history of philosophy, at least Western philosophy, people talk about mind, they talk about reason, but they rarely talk about intelligence. And the interesting thing about mind and reason and so on is it's something that all humans are supposed to have. When Immanuel Kant, the great Enlightenment philosopher, is talking about how reason distinguishes humans from other species and how we should all use our reason, he was assuming that this was something we all had and could all use equally. But at the same time as these philosophers like Immanuel Kant and others were starting to think about the nature of the brain and the nature of the cognition, Europeans were involved in the colonial project. So what started out as exploration and trade rapidly became conquest and domination. And as with most people doing terrible things, they didn't think of themselves as terrible people. They needed some kind of ideology to justify to themselves what they were doing. So there was this idea of a kind of civilizing mission. And initially it was very associated with Christianity and bringing Christianity and so on. But as the scientific revolution developed, this started to change. And we see around this time in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, the development of the concept of race, which didn't exist in anything like its, the form in which we understand it now, 500 years ago, for example. But we see it developing in the imperial period as a quasi-scientific theory of different humans. And of course, it was developed by white people as a hierarchy. And they placed themselves at the top, of course, and then described the other so-called races in different ways and associated characteristics with them. And the characteristic foremost associated by white people with white people was intelligence. Intelligence and industriousness and inventiveness and certain other qualities, but intelligence. And the fact that they had this kind of technological superiority, which was, because industrialization happened first, justified to them. It was a kind of proof. So they could use their new guns and their new ships and the other products of industrialization and the scientific revolution to conquer these other countries. And for them, they were also the proof of their superiority. It's like, because we managed to invent better guns, that's why we deserve to conquer other people. And not just deserve to, but even increasingly, it became a sense of duty.
Moral duty. We need to save them from them.
Exactly. Yeah. That these poor other races, they don't know how to look after themselves. They can't govern themselves. They don't know how to look after their land. So it's the Europeans' duty to come and do it for them. And then this ideology developed throughout the 19th century. And then as part of the scientific project, people started to try to measure what they thought was this intellectual superiority.
And they were even measuring the size of the skull or the brain, isn't it, to determine, there's a term for that.
Yes, craniometry.
There you go. Yeah.
Exactly. So so there were a lot of theories at the time about the shape of the head and the shape of the skull, and you could tell criminals by having a bump here and a bump there and so on. But as the idea of intelligence or mental capacity became more important, people started to measure skull size. So they would, take the skulls of dead people from different so-called races and sort of fill them with beans and see how many beans there were and this kind of thing. And whole theories were developed around this. Scientists spent their whole careers developing this kind of thing. And of course, it didn't prove anything like what they wanted to. The whole thing completely collapsed under the weight of the evidence. It turns out there is no significant difference in brain size. But this didn't stop people from trying to measure mental capacity. And an instrumental figure in this is Sir Francis Galton, who is an English gentleman and scientist obsessed with measurement. He was a cousin of Charles Darwin, very impressed by Darwin's theory of evolution. And he developed the theory of eugenics, the idea that we could improve humanity by selective breeding. And of course, the people he thought should breed most were English gentlemen like himself. And he also introduced the idea of intelligence testing. It was very crude when he started doing this, but it set in motion the kind of intelligence testing that we see today.
Interesting. So when the early measures were not working, they invented new measures, but they just carried on changing the measuring goalpost to prove the point, if you will.
Exactly.
It speaks volumes of what we see today in environmental and social sustainability. Everybody says, what gets measured gets done, but we've got to take that thing with a pinch of salt, sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to look at the ideology of those behind it, exactly,
yeah.
of those
who are doing the
measuring.
It's not what gets measured gets done, it's what gets done gets measured. In a way that's convenient to me,
Yeah.
But I'm a minority there, but interesting. But, I'm curious, you've studied this from a Western perspective that, the white man was trying to prove his intellectual superiority and therefore finding a moral duty. But this kind of race-based hierarchies were present in other cultures as well. For example, the caste system in India. I wondered if you looked at that and whether that had anything to do with intelligence.
Well, there were lots of theories about when humans started to develop hierarchies. A lot of people associate it with the development of agriculture. So from about 10,000 years ago up until today, of course, some civilizations still don't use agriculture in the way that we usually do. And people associate the development of agriculture with development of hierarchical societies, and then these hierarchies have to be justified somehow. And of course, there are many different ways of doing that, but it's usually a sense of birthright. People are born into a certain caste or class, and this is ordained by God or gods of some kind. Justifying it using an attribute like intelligence is unusual. At least it's unusual to make it so explicit. So it might be that Brahmin in India consider themselves more intelligent, but it wasn't tested in order to work out whether you should be a Brahmin. Yeah. Rather, it's a God's given right.
So while the West was measuring the size of the skull and by filling beans in it, the East was looking at it as a God-given right to dominate. But domination is what it was. Very good. And now, so before we go into AI, you also mentioned that the SAT test was not designed to give everybody an equal chance to join and enter American universities. What was it designed for?
Well, this is a good question. So intelligence testing really took off when it reached America, the US, in the early part of the last century. And it was picked up by a group of psychologists who were explicit eugenicists. I mean, they were literally card-carrying members of the eugenics movement, or even leaders in the eugenics movement. And they felt very threatened by the waves of immigration coming into the US at the time. And so they developed intelligence tests. And these tests were very biased towards white middle-class males who had been born in the US or educated in the European style. So lots of questions which only those kinds of people would know the answer to. And these tests were then deployed in order to demonstrate the superiority of exactly that class, the class from which all these psychologists came. But these psychologists were the people who developed intelligence tests that were used across American society in order to, become an officer in the army and so on, and the SAT in order to get into the top colleges. And this is at a time when those who were running those colleges, the class of people who were used to dominating the intake of those colleges, were very worried about Jewish people and other people coming in and taking their places. So rather than trying to find the best possible students, the most deserving students, this was about protecting class privilege.
So then IQ tests were invented and things like that. Given that there are so many different kinds of intelligences that we all have, what's your view on testing for intelligence in general?
Well, it's now understood that intelligence is very multifaceted. So all tests that test anything like intelligence are a so-called battery of different kinds of testing different kinds of ability. They're still very controversial. They're only meaningful if they're correlated with other kinds of success, of course. Like, what is it you want to find out if you're giving someone an intelligence test? They are still very influential. They're still used, in fact, more than ever. Psychometrics is an enormous industry.
EQ tests, and there's EQ versus IQ debate, and this, that, and the other. There's this testing galore.
Exactly. I mean, they very much shaped my life. It was instrumental in when I was 11, I took an IQ test called the 11 Plus to get into secondary school. Later, I spent time in the diplomatic service in the UK. It was a day of different kinds of IQ tests. Was the first stage of getting in. So they very much shaped my life. But they're still very controversial, of course, because certain demographics systematically do worse, in a way that suggests that there are still biases in those tests. And we know that scholars of intelligence will tell you that there are lots of things they don't measure and can't possibly measure, such as wisdom, creativity, social and emotional skills, and so on.
And those vary from time to time within the same individual as well. So this is exactly right. So I'm not a huge fan of psychometric tests and those kinds of things anyway. But again, that's popular stuff.
Yeah.
People love it. Okay, fast forward to today, AI. And so in the past, intelligence was used to dominate other people, right? Today, one could argue that AI has kind of democratized intelligence. Today, anybody and everybody has access to so-called intelligence. So will it still be used as a tool for domination going forward?
So I would say not that intelligence has been used to dominate others, but rather the idea of intelligence has been used to justify domination.
Right.
So we associate in our minds intelligence with a kind of dominance hierarchy. Well, no one, in particular in the West, where this ideology was developed. So if you think the most intelligent people have a duty and a right to rule over others, which is the ideology of intelligence, then what happens if we have machines that are more intelligent than us? Well, it's interesting to look at where many of the worries about intelligent machines rising up and dominating us are coming from. They're coming from exactly that demographic, white, educated men like me, who are used to justifying their top spot in society with the ideology of intelligence. In other words, the worry is that people like me are going to be knocked off the top spot.
Can machines become more intelligent than humans?
This is an interesting question. I think, because intelligence as a concept has become so dominant in the idea of intelligence testing, we should think about the kind of assumptions that is making. And the key one is that intelligence is a single faculty that is on a kind of straight line from less intelligent to more intelligent. And that's just not the case. There are so many different kinds of skills all bundled up. So when we talk about machines achieving human-like intelligence, they won't achieve human-like intelligence because they're not human-like. I mean, my calculator is superhuman in its ability to do maths.
Much faster than you and I.
Much faster.
But there are many things that it cannot do.
Exactly.
That you and I can do.
Exactly. So we're used to machines being much better than us in certain very specific ways. And, even when nowadays, of course, we have large language models like ChatGPT that are also extremely good at putting sentences together and convincing us that they're broadly intelligent. But they don't work in anything like the way that humans do. Of course, they're accessing...
So then why are we so worried about machines one day dominating humans?
And there are lots of things to worry about. But the machine rising up and taking control and dominating us in the way that colonial powers did exactly that over other humans, that's the wrong thing to worry about. That's an extension of this 19th century ideology.
What are the things we should worry about when it comes to AI?
Well, there are lots of ways in which this technology can do harm. Mostly this is a mix of, on the one hand, well-intentioned humans not realizing the kind of harm that their machines can do. And on the one hand, people who don't have good intentions using this tools for ill. These are very powerful tools. And I mean, we talk about AI as if it's one thing, but of course it isn't. It's very many different kinds of technologies. And it's also a technology that unlocks many other technological developments. So we're in a period of incredibly rapid technological development. And history tells us that we always need to be extremely careful at such moments.
And so if you were to point your finger on, say, two of the biggest dangers of the misuse of AI going forward, which are the two that you worry most about?
The two. Well, okay. Well, one classic worry is that it will put people out of their jobs. I think humans are very good at making up things for each other to do. Who would have predicted 50 years ago there'd be so many baristas as there are today? But the long run...
Sorry to interrupt, but when it comes to any turn of technology, right? You look at history, when the electricity was invented, when the automobile was invented, a lot of people were displaced.
Yes.
And got out of business or out of their jobs. But over time, technology always created more jobs than it destroyed. So what I'm getting at is not the fear of jobs going away, because there will be a displacement, and after some time we will find, because the people who run these systems we will need people and jobs that run these systems in the first place, right behind. But in terms of the wrong use of AI, you mentioned earlier that it could get into the wrong hands and then used for means and to do things that are evil. What are those two biggest worries?
Well, but I want to press on the unemployment question, okay, just because I think on the one hand, people often, when they're considering a new technology, they want to focus on what's new about it. It's like, what's different? We've had technological unemployment before. What's different this time? Well, there are two things I want to say to that. One is that it doesn't have to be different, because the history shows that these waves of technological unemployment, in the long run, these technologies have created more jobs, they created prosperity. It's astonishing that there are 8 billion people alive today and yet more people in work than ever before. So people think, that gives the lie to the idea of technological unemployment. But putting people out of work can still have enormous knock-on effects for that particular individual, their family, that community, and social stability. So, if we look at the Industrial Revolution, then certainly it created many more jobs than it destroyed, which was not what people thought at the time. And yet it's created immense prosperity, but it was an extremely rough ride. The amount of displacement and inequality that it caused was instrumental in the rise of communism and fascism and so on. So I'm an optimist when it comes to everyone finding work for each other to do. 100 years from now, we'll all be more prosperous, but it could still be a very rough ride.
Very rough ride, yeah. So that's on the unemployment piece. What is one other big worry?
Yes. Well, there are lots of ways in which AI can put power in the hands of people whom we wouldn't want having that kinds of power. So in itself, AI isn't a weapon, but it can be used to create weapons.
For example?
For example, AI can be used to identify and develop new pathogens, much more contagious and deadly than COVID, for example, or to develop poisons. You can ask large language models to help you build a bomb. And then, of course, it can be used to create autonomous machines of various kinds. We think of AI as sort of existing in the cloud, but of course robots, which have lagged behind in many ways in the last 50, 60 years, lagged behind what people thought they would achieve, are now being brought together with machine learning. And it's entirely possible people could develop drones, combine them with facial recognition technology, and send a swarm of them out to assassinate particular individuals or everyone who looks a certain way, for example. So autonomous weapons are a real worry.
Unemployment would be the two big ones. So what should we do about this?
Well, there is no one magic bullet. I think the responsibility for developing AI responsibly falls at every level in society. Individual engineers need to stop saying, well, it's not my problem, I'm just solving the what I was told to solve, building what I was told to build. I need to think carefully about how what they're building is an expression of their values and think about the consequences it's having. But of course, engineers exist within a corporate culture, and corporations need to take a responsible approach, thinking about using ethics boards and impact assessments and broad stakeholder consultation. But at the same time, we need regulation of these technologies, but also a kind of social policy that will help countries through this transition. If entire groups of people, taxi drivers or whatever it might be, or accountants are put out of work, then what measures exist to support them through that? Welfare, retraining, and so on. And then we need international agreements, because this is, of course, a problem that crosses borders.
So would it be fair to say that it's a question of values? How we use the technology, how we develop this technology or this group of technologies that we are lumping under what's called AI, depends on us humans as to what values do we apply in developing and using them.
Absolutely. Today we often talk about innovation, but in the old days we talk more about progress. And progress suggests that we're improving humanity, that we're doing something that isn't just about technological advancement, but is also value-driven. And innovation we've lost that sense, I think. I think the very rapid technological transformation that we're undergoing will pose immense challenges to the structures of our society. And only if we enter into this period with our eyes firmly fixed on the values that matter to us, democracy and the rule of law, compassion and care for the environment and so on, only if we do that will we be able to hold on to what matters through this period.
Otherwise, we'll end up destroying ourselves.
It's a risk.
Yeah. Okay, very well. Talking about destroying life, let's switch to another topic. You've also been researching longevity and life extension. What are you learning there?
Well, this is a really interesting moment for life extension. The first thing that the history of life extension teaches us is that almost every culture in human history has believed itself to be on the verge of discovering the elixir of life. And our culture is no different. So we don't think we'll do it through magic or a gift of the gods or a fountain of youth or alchemy, but we think that we'll do it through, biochemistry and medical interventions. So it's tempting to dismiss some of the hype around the life extension movement. But at the same time, there are reasons to think that we might be entering a different phase. And those reasons are, firstly, that we have doubled life expectancy in the last 150 years. Now, that sounds incredible, and it is incredible. It's very likely that, we, or at least one of us, wouldn't be here 150 years ago because, half of people died in their infancy. So we've doubled life expectancy from late 30s to 40 to around 70s, 80 or so. But it's important to understand that was mostly achieved through addressing infant mortality. Now, of course, if half people are dying before the age of 5, and life expectancy on average is around 40, that means the other half are living until they're older. So in a way, by tackling infant mortality, you're allowing nature to take its course. But we're not only have we doubled life expectancy by addressing infant mortality, but in the last 60, 70 years, life expectancy has continued to go up, even beyond that, by about 2 years per decade. And in that time, we've decoded the human genome, and we understand human biology vastly better than ever before. And there are a lot of interventions now which are being hyped as potential breakthroughs that will give us even more years.
And so is it fair to say that we doubled it in the last 150 years, but with the speed of technological development and what we know today compared to what we knew 150 years ago, the doubling from here will take much less than 150 years?
It's very hard to say, because and that uncertainty is part of what's so difficult to deal with, particularly from a social policy point of view. But on the one hand, there are some scholars who believe it's not possible at all, that it won't happen, that there's some kind of hard limit that we don't yet fully understand at around 120 years, which is the longest anyone has ever lived. Maybe we can push up average life expectancy to a century and beyond. Some people think that the newest generation to be born in the wealthiest countries will live to be 100 on average, but they dispute that it's possible to go beyond that. Whereas others think, but look, we've got new ways of tackling cancer, of heart disease, of dementia, and so on. We're understanding the biology of aging itself. Soon we really will be able to remove any limit to human longevity.
Like any body part that is not working, we'll be able to replace it.
Exactly.
Literally go to the supermarket and replace it. And so there are a lot of people who are saying, including yourself in some of your writings, that 160 is possible.
Well, I think we're reaching a phase where we need to think about that possibility.
Okay.
So I know I'm not giving I'm not making any prophecies here. As I say, some people think it's completely impossible. Some people think it's on the verge. But our challenges, for me as a philosopher, as policymakers, as those interested in making these kind of technological revolutions go well, is to think, well, what happens if either one of these possibilities comes true?
And what happens if 160 becomes a reality?
Yeah, it's great for the people who get more years, but socially and environmentally, it's an enormous challenge. Of course, the most common worry people think about is overpopulation, and overpopulation is a genuine worry. It's one that people have been raising for a long time. I'm sure you've heard of Thomas Malthus, a sort of English priest and writer who predicted this hundreds of years ago. And this kind of, we now think of it as a Malthusian catastrophe. And many people say, well, there were only like 500 million people alive at the time, and now we've got 8 billion. So he was wrong. The carrying capacity of the Earth is not fixed. It's dependent on our technology. And if we continue with technological advance, we can continue to increase it indefinitely. That's what the optimists say. But of course, look at the world. Yes, there are 8 billion people alive and relatively low levels of poverty by historic standards. But at the same time, we're consuming the Earth's resources at a completely unsustainable rate. We're destroying biodiversity, driving up global warming, and so on. So it's really not clear that the Earth's carrying capacity is at 8 billion people with the current technological development. And if there is radical life extension, to 150, 160, there will be an enormous population boom, even if the number of children goes down, even if people stop having children or have many fewer children, just because the number of generations alive at any one time will very suddenly increase. So there will be an enormous population boom, which will, of course, put enormous strain on the Earth's resources.
So, and yet, I hear, whether it's AI, whether it's life extension, we have a lot of things to worry about. But that's been the trend with technology and technological advancement ever since the dawn of humanity. Right? We've always worried about technology and its advancement and the harm it could cause. And yet, our human history says, net, we've come out pretty positive. Yes, technology has created damages, but we've also net ended up in improving quality of life, etc. Who would have thought that 8 billion people with maximum employment would happen today? Given all of that, if you had the choice to live to 160 Would you? And B, are you net an optimist that eventually human ingenuity will prevail and we will be all right? Both with AI and life extension.
Yeah, so we need optimists as well as pessimists. We need optimists who are doing fantastic, exciting things with these technologies, who believe in the power of these technologies to achieve immense good. We absolutely need that. But we need the pessimists too, because it's the pessimists who point out the risks so that we can do something about them.
Yeah. So, are you?
I think I would, as someone who works on technology, I would love to see the world 100 years from now. So I'm just over 50. I would love to see what the world looks like 100 years from now. I'm not one for prophecies, as you know, but is it going to work out well? Well, if it does, I want to see that. And if it does, what made that happen? And was any of the things I'm suggesting helpful in any of that, or was I completely wrong? So if we can keep the world in a decent state, and if my loved ones are still around, then I'm in no rush to go anywhere.
And if you're healthy.
Exactly, and if we're healthy.
Yeah. Very good, very good. It's been very, very fun and enlightening talking to you. I think you're pointing to some very important issues, and I love the fact that you said we need both optimists and pessimists. Pessimists to tell us about what could go wrong, so we can do something about it. And that's exactly how steward leaders should be thinking about the future. It's not about just creating a better future for me or my shareholder. It is about creating a collective better future for all of humanity and society at large. And that's what these conversations hope to bring, shed light on. So, Stephen, once again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And, as all of you know, this episode and all the other episodes will be hosted on stewardshipcommons.com. And if you're not on stewardshipcommons.com, please join. And that's where you will find lots more of such episodes and other information on how you can be a steward leader. Thank you again, and thank you, everyone.